Welcome to Handmade History.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Alicia.
And I'm Sonia.
And today we are talking about the Saturday Evening Girls and Paul Revere Pottery.
But first, this episode is sponsored by our Patreon patrons. Patreon is a platform for creators, and our Patreon page is a great way to support the show. For our free members, we have a blog post for each episode with pictures, videos, and links to learn more about every episode, starting with Season 2. For our paid members, we offer discounts to crafty businesses and a membership to our Discord. We invite you to join our Patreon at any level at patreon.com/handmadehistorypodcast. And right now, if you sign up at any level, you'll be entered to win a copy of Anne H. Putnam's memoir, Make, Do, and Mend. We recorded a special bonus episode with her at the beginning of the month. Thank you.
And speaking of books, with this episode, we are kicking off a read-along of a historical novel about today's topic. And I am really excited about this. Throughout the month of May, we'll be reading The Saturday Evening Girls Club by Jane Healey, and we invite you to join us. Historical novels are one of my favorite ways to learn about history. When I was 11 or 12, I knew a lot about the Napoleonic Wars because I had read the book Desiree by Anne-Marie Selinko. And the Saturday Evening Girls Club is fantastic. It's about 3 girls who are in the SEG. One of them works in the Paul Revere Pottery shop, and you get to meet some of the women that we'll talk about today, like Edith Guerriere. For our read-along, we'll post about the book each week on Instagram and Facebook and on Patreon. And we will have a special bonus episode where I sit down and talk with the author, Jane Healey. I am really excited. If you'd like to join in, grab a copy of Jane Healey's The Saturday Evening Girls Club at your favorite bookstore or library, and we'll start reading on May 6th. And now, on to the show.
The Saturday Evening Girls Club was an intellectual enrichment club for young women in the early 1900s. It began in the North End in Boston at a school called the North Bennett Street Industrial School. It started as a story hour or book club. Eventually, the group grew and became a business venture called Paul Revere Pottery. The girls in the club made the pottery and sold it to upper and middle-class buyers around the country. It's a unique venture because most of the girls were first-generation Italian and Jewish Americans. All of them were low income. And they published a newsletter called the SEG News for 3 years from 1914 to 1917. The pottery is very collectible today. The most valuable pieces were made by Sarah Gallner, who was an incredibly talented and prolific potter. Her vases, bowls, plates, and other works are held in several museums, including a collection of over 100 pieces at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. The Met calls Paul Revere Pottery and the Saturday Evening Girls, quote, icons of the arts and craft movement. This was an artistic and interior design style that was super popular in the early 1900s. It began in Europe but soon became popular in the U.S. The hallmarks of arts and crafts style are bright, bold colors, organic motifs like flowers, and simple designs. It's a sharp contrast to the ornate Victorian style that dominated design in the decades before, and it's still very popular today.
The Saturday Evening Girls Club began as a story hour or book club, as we mentioned, at the North Bennett Street Industrial School. This school was a trade school that was meant to teach local kids and young adults skills that would help them enter the workforce. However, the offerings for girls were focused on domestic chores and skills like cooking, cleaning, and sewing. Edith Guerriere started the story hour in 1899. She worked at the North Bennett School. She had a unique background in that she was well educated and came from the upper class, but was not independently wealthy and did not wish to marry. Kate Clifford Larson, who wrote an excellent paper on the SEG, notes that, quote, Guerriere exemplified the growing population of well-educated single women caught between their middle or upper class family identity and the economic realities of needing to support themselves. Guerriere was raised by several relatives, including Anna Ricketson, whose 2 best friends were Louisa May Alcott and her younger sister, Anna Alcott Pratt. Larson writes, these women opened up a world of possibilities to Guerriere and offered her a model of womanhood that stretched beyond the domestic sphere to a world of independence, literature, and sisterhood. Guerriere was educated at the Vermont Methodist Seminary and Female College. She then attended the Museum School at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. There, she met Edith Brown, an artist, in 1893. The two women moved in together and remained together for 40 years until Brown's death. Brown became an art teacher at the North Bennett School, and eventually the Ediths, as they were called, ran Paul Revere Pottery together.
At first, Guerriere's story hour was a combination of readings and talks for young women. Often, there was chocolate and lemonade. This was one of the only intellectual opportunities open to girls and young women at the time. Fanny Goldstein, an SEG who became an important librarian, wrote a poem later that described the situation Guerriere saw. Quote, "She looked at the churches, she looked at the schools. She looked at the streets, she looked at the tools. She looked at the club rooms, some 20 or more, and beheld with amazement only boys, boys galore." Girls were hungry for books and learning. The North Bennett School kept records of attendance in the separate boys' and girls' reading rooms. In 1897 and 98, the average daily attendance for boys was 97. For girls, it was 110. By 1901, the reading room at the school was overflowing. Children waited outside the doors, sometimes up to an hour, to get in. The average daily attendance for girls increased to 193, while for boys it went down to 64. Unfortunately, this was not reflected in the reading room's collections. The boys' room held over 1,000 books, while the girls had only 600. Part of the motivation for the North Bennett School to start the SEG was to protect girls from the so-called street. The board wanted girls to have wholesome activities to do in the evening. As Larson writes, the reality is that many of these girls were not permitted to go out anywhere in the evening without a chaperone. Typical SEGs were the younger daughters of new immigrant families. They had to sneak out to the SEG and sometimes even hide their books from their families. Many of their parents saw American culture as a threat to their own religious and cultural traditions.
As we mentioned, the story hour at first revolved around books and speakers. Guerriere wrote hundreds of letters to speakers, including doctors, lawyers, educators, activists, social reformers, clergy members, and artists. The club became incredibly popular and grew to include more girls. By 1915, there were 250 girls in 8 different clubs. The SEG was for young women, 20 and older. Friday evening was for working women, 18 to 20 years old. Other evenings and afternoons were for girls from 5th grade through high school. Larson writes, quote, "The goal of most young library club girls was ultimately to become a Saturday evening girl. Each June, the Friday evening girls who were older than 20 were formally invited to join the SEG. The library clubs were part of a self-governing organization. 10 members were elected yearly by the SEG to run the entire club. A separate house committee met weekly. They made policies and rules. The other girls in all the clubs voted on them. This was a unique opportunity for many of the girls to experience democracy hands-on. And Larson points out that it was an opportunity for agency. Many of these girls and young women did not have control over their own lives at work or at home."
Another key player in the creation of Paul Revere Pottery was Helen Starrow. Starrow was born Helen Osborne in 1864. Her family was full of intellectuals and activists. Her great-aunt was Lucretia Mott, the famous suffragist. Her grandmother was Martha Coffinwright, another suffragist. Family friends included Susan B. Anthony and Harriet Tubman, who was her neighbor as a child. She married lawyer and banker James Jackson Starrow Jr. in 1891. This upper-class family was influential in Boston. They are the Starrows for whom Starrow Drive is named. Helen Starrow became a philanthropist. She joined the North Bennett School's Board of Managers in 1898, so she oversaw all of Edith Guerriere's work establishing and growing the SEG. Starrow was also friends with Guerriere and her partner Edith Brown. She gifted them a European vacation in 1906. This is where the Ediths came up with the idea to start a business venture for the SEG. They wanted a way for the girls to earn money. They recognized that the girls in the SEG needed to contribute to their family's income, which often prevented them from going to college and even high school. So they were thinking about this while traveling around Europe. Guerriere wrote in her autobiography that they visited, quote, "a charming little pottery on the Lake of Thun in Switzerland, and saw peasantware of Italy, Holland, Germany, and Switzerland. This inspired the Ediths." Guerriere wrote, quote, "Since our club girls were almost all of peasant stock, why not start an art pottery and produce American peasant wear?"
This so-called peasant wear was pottery made during the arts and crafts movement, which was at the time quite popular in Europe. In addition to those organic designs and bright colors we mentioned, this movement also emphasized making things by hand. William Morris, who is often considered the father of arts and crafts, is believed to have said, "Have nothing in your house that you do not know to be useful or believe to be beautiful." Morris encouraged people to make their own furniture, for example. So the movement naturally included handmade and hand-painted pottery. The following summer, in 1907, the Ediths began learning about pottery. They hired a local potter and pottery chemist to help them make clay and glazes. At this time, the Ediths lived together in Chestnut Hill. Very quickly, they held their first classes in pottery at their home that same summer, and they called this the Bowl Shop. In the fall of 1907, they tried to establish a pottery studio in West Gloucester. This was near the SEG camp, which was a vacation spot that the SEGs got to visit for 1 week each year as part of their club membership. It was owned by Helen Storrow. But this was not a good location for a studio because it was difficult to transport materials out of the city, and it was also quite cold in the winter.
In 1908, Storrow bought a house in the North End at 18 Hull Street. It was a 4-story brick row house opposite Copp's Hill Burying Ground and near Old North Church. This was where Paul Revere hung his lantern to warn the colonists that the British were coming. The official name of the house was the Library Clubhouse, but in pottery and in pictures, it was often called Hull House, and this is where Paul Revere Pottery was born. The two Ediths moved into the top floor. They ran the pottery studio here for the next 7 years. Interestingly, in 1908, the North Bennett School began offering pottery classes for boys. 3 girls managed to gain entrance to these classes: Albina Mangini, Cecilia Levrone, and Rose Dondero. They would all go on to become SEGs and decorators at Paul Revere Pottery. But by 1916, the North Bennett School still didn't allow girls into their pottery classes. In fact, although the North Bennett School was the incubator for the SEG, they really did not have anything to do with Paul Revere Pottery.
The SEGs did almost everything at Paul Revere Pottery. There was one male employee who was in charge of firing the kiln. Otherwise, the SEGs made the pottery and painted it, packed and shipped the pottery, and cleaned and maintained Hull House. Some of the SEGs worked part-time at Paul Revere Pottery, and a few worked full-time. These girls earned money that ranged from $3 to $4 to $10 each week. This would be about $100 to $140 each week to $340 each week. They also had 2 weeks of paid vacation time and daily hot lunch. Their workdays were 8 hours long, and their working conditions were superior to factory work. The studio was well lit with natural light. The Ediths always had cut flowers in the house. Young women would also come in and read or play music for the SEGs as they worked. Every SEG volunteered at least 1 hour of house time each week, cleaning and cooking. Many worked a few hours assisting with the pottery to earn money. This helped them earn money for their club dues, which were $8 a year, and to pay for their week of vacation at the SEG camp, which cost between $5.50 and $6.20 in the early 1910s. The SEGs also raised money through plays and other performances for the upper classes in Boston, and they hosted groups of tourists who came in to see the girls working at Hull House. And this reminded me of our very first episode on the Radio Homemakers, where the hosts would have people come to their houses and see where they recorded the shows, and they had to bake them cookies.
Paul Revere Pottery was an artistic success. In February of 1912, they were written up in Craftsman magazine. They were also written up in House Beautiful and the Art World. Their pottery was sold around the country. It was priced higher than other mass-produced pottery. For example, it cost 75 cents to $2.50 for a small bowl, $7 for a large pitcher, $18 for a large bowl, $31 for a lamp, and $50 for a large vase decorated with chrysanthemums. That vase would be more than $1,600 today, and the most inexpensive bowl would be about $25. Paul Revere Pottery was marketed to the upper classes. The upper classes were mostly white, not immigrants, and not typically Jewish or Italian. In fact, in Boston, there was a strong nativist or anti-immigrant bias among the upper classes at this time. So the reactions from the customers to this new venture, while favorable to the business, were not always kind. People were surprised that first-generation immigrants from a poor neighborhood in the city had such an aptitude for learning and making pottery. When they visited, they expected to see girls who were uneducated and spoke very little English. Sarah Gallner, who we mentioned at the top of the episode, is one of the most collectible Paul Revere pottery artists today. Remembered she and some of the other SEGs acted like they were dumb and pretended not to speak English when some visitors came to see the, quote, illiterate, ignorant immigrant girls. Another time, they put on a play for Isabella Stewart Gardner, who was a Boston socialite and philanthropist, and her friends. Several of the girls remembered Gardner telling them to not touch the tapestries in her house. Gardner also gave out small Paul Revere pottery bowls to her guests, but gave only cheap fans to the SEGs. So the business was a success, but the girls still struggled to gain respect and acceptance.
The SEG also ran their own newsletter, the SEG News, from 1914 to 1917. Fanny Goldstein, an SEG we mentioned earlier who became a librarian, was the editor-in-chief. Goldstein was born in Austria-Hungary in 1886 and immigrated with her family to the North End. She was Jewish. When she was 10, she began to work to contribute to her family, and she was unable to go to high school. The SEG became her higher-level education. The SEG News included a wide variety of articles and features. The girls wrote on current events about topics like immigration, education, democracy, and literature. There were also educational essays on topics like history and social sciences. Guest contributors wrote articles on business and politics. There were social announcements like engagements and elopements, and there was neighborhood news. There was also a market section that reported on shipments coming into Boston's docks, and career outlook guides for careers like social work, library work, teaching, and nursing. Goldstein also wrote an editorial each month. Larson, the researcher we mentioned, calls them, quote, highly charged political statements about women's roles in society, social workers, and life in an immigrant community. It was important to Goldstein that the low-income working girls of the SEG got to tell their own stories and share their own opinions. Other publications often saw the poor as a problem to be solved, but that is not how they saw themselves. Eventually, Goldstein became an assistant in the library under Edith Guerrier. She wrote that she was, quote, the first Jewish girl in history to receive this appointment. In 1922, she became head of the West End branch of the Boston Public Library. And in 1925, she established Jewish Book Week, which eventually became Jewish Book Month. In 1954, she was appointed the curator of Judaica at the BPL. And because of her, her siblings were able to attend high school. And she had a lifelong commitment to working with people who were, quote, foreign-born.
One of the most well-known and collected artists of the SEG is Sarah Gallner. Gallner was born in 1894 in Austria-Hungary. She was a talented artist and became a decorator at Paul Revere Pottery. At first, Guerrier and Starrow offered her a part-time job at $4 a week, which is about $130 today. She turned it down because she earned more as a dressmaker. Eventually, she negotiated a wage of $7 per week for all the decorators. She herself earned up to $10 a week, or about $320 today. She married Morris Bloom, and they had 3 children. Her son, David Bloom, collected her work and donated a huge collection to the MFA in Boston. One of her tiles sold for $219,750 in 2013. Many of the SEGs went on to have great success in multiple spheres. Most of them married and became middle-class housewives. Larson points out that this was a huge step up from the lives their mothers led as impoverished new immigrants in the North End. Larson did a study of a small group of SEGs who self-reported their educations and careers. A significant amount, 54%, took some courses at colleges or professional schools. Almost 20% went on to graduate college from places like Simmons, Radcliffe, Harvard, Boston University, the Boston Conservatory, and others. This rate is more than double the rate of higher education for young American women at this time, which ranged from 3 to 8%.
Pretty impressive. The archives for the SEG and Paul Revere Pottery are held at the Schlesinger Library at Harvard, and me and our other sister went to check them out. I saw tons of photos of the girls at the camp, the SEG camp, which was on Wingersheek Beach. There were also photos and invitations from gatherings several decades later. Edith Gruyere invited the SEG to a special celebration around Christmas, and she gave a pin to each member. The SEG held a luncheon to celebrate Gruyere's retirement, and they had another to celebrate Fanny Goldstein's retirement. Many girls from the other day clubs, like the Friday Evening Girls, continued to meet up as well. This was reported in a newsletter that was probably written in the late 1930s or early 1940s and included essays and thoughts from various members of the SEG and other day groups. Annie Kropp Edelson wrote the introduction, and we'll end with her words. The SEG have remained through the years, and still are, a joyous, tireless group of women who have shown themselves to be unconquerable in whatever career they followed, whether it was one of the professions, a business career, or that of homemaker and mother. The personal bond among us is unique, inasmuch as we have the memory of happy childhood and girlhood in common. The memory of playing and working together with zeal and community effort toward that which would benefit the greatest number is in itself a priceless heritage, particularly in this day and age when there are still great masses of people to be educated to the premise of the rule of the majority with due regard for minorities. And that is Paul Revere Pottery and the Saturday Evening Girls. Sonia, what do you think?
I love that. We go to the North End quite a bit.
Yes.
But I didn't know about this history that was right there.
Yeah.
Been to the Paul Revere house.
It's pretty
the
awesome.
old church. Yeah.
You probably walked past the studio.
I probably did, yeah. And I was looking at the pottery and it's it's so cool. And yeah, it looks very modern now, right? It's all back, I feel. So
yeah, arts and crafts really still is part of our taste, I feel like. So I really liked that the girls got to go on a vacation every year to this camp that was their special camp. Looking at the photos, they just seemed to have so much fun together. And I really think that Helen Starrow understood the value of a vacation.
Yeah, and the fact that they, the people who worked there got 2 weeks paid vacation.
Yeah.
That was standard for them, and yeah. Also fun because, Starrow Drive.
I know. Well, thank you so much for listening. We hope you'll join us for a read-along of Jane Healy's The Saturday Evening Girls Club starting May 6th.
To see links and photos and learn more about this episode, visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/handmadehistorypodcast. If you have a question or comment or suggestion for a future episode, you can email us at handmadehistoryhosts, hosts@gmail.com, or visit our website at handmadehistorypodcast.com.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Can you hear the train over there?
Yeah.
Oh my God. It's so loud. It must be running late. We've never heard the train before.